So, former CIA officer Andrew Bustamante inexplicably decided to weigh in on emergency preparedness for some reason. It was exactly as insightful as you would expect from someone with absolutely no education, training, or experience in public safety. Let's get after it. I'm James Merritt, emergency manager and career soldier, and this is Readiness Nation. So, former CIA officer and founder of the Everyday Spy company, Andrew Bustamante, thought it'd be a good idea to weigh in on emergency preparedness in a video over on his channel. Now, I can't for the life of me figure out why a former CIA officer with no other education, training, or experience than being a CIA officer and a former nuclear missile officer in the Air Force would think that he has anything relevant to say about emergency preparedness. The CIA has absolutely no role in emergency management, emergency response, or public safety. And the Air Force only has a very limited role in the form of transporting men and materiel. As such, there's no way he was trained by the CIA or the Air Force in emergency preparedness. So he has no better understanding of public safety operations than any random person off the street. And man, does it show. Now, I wouldn't normally go so hard in the paint on a fellow government stooge out of professional courtesy. But the stuff he was saying is not only wrong, it's not only dangerous, but it actively undermines public safety operations. But this does give me the opportunity to address an element from one of the first dissenting comments I ever got on this channel, which is what elements of government doctrine and training from which agencies actually have relevance to emergency preparedness, and why. Furthermore, if this makes it back to Andy and he takes exception to anything I have to say, I'm happy to have a civil and professional conversation with him about it on or offline, as is my policy with anyone I react or respond to on this channel. But here's the clip in question.
You're right. Most people think about prepping. So they think about sheltering in place. Mistake number one that CIA teaches you is you never shelter in place. Never shelter in place, because when you shelter in place, you force yourself into a position where you're relying on diminishing resources. You never want to put yourself in a position where the food you eat, the water you drink, the shelter you live in is a diminishing resource, because then there's a timeline. It can only last for so long. And especially in like an all-out disaster, there's nobody coming to help you. So sheltering in place, the idea of prepping your underground bunker or hardening your house or filling your drawer, your closets full of guns, that is a fundamental error that marketers don't understand, but true tier one operators do. You never let yourself shelter in one place. Instead, you keep yourself mobile, because in motion, you carry the resources that you have and you can constantly collect new resources on the way, right? So consider it the difference between having a shelf full of ammunition for your 9mm handgun, and then you sit in your house with all of your ammunition, or you move, and every time you come across a dead body or a killed cop, you collect their 9mm ammunition, you move on another mile, you collect more, and you collect what you need, and you carry what you need. So mobility is huge when it comes to actual survivability. Mobility and survivability is what we're taught, not sheltering in place. So that's the bonus answer. Tiers of Bugout. Generally speaking, you have to consider the fact that bug-out disasters are going to come in three flavors. There's survivability, immediate survivability, then there's sustainability, and then there's escape. So when it comes to immediately survivability, you only need to survive 24 hours, right? How do you get from noon today till noon tomorrow? That's what we call a 24-hour bag. So a 24-hour bag is small, it's light, it's easy. You carry a couple of bottles of water, you carry a little bit of food, you carry a change in footwear, you carry a change in clothes just in case it's warm or cold wherever you're living. But you just need to survive 24 hours.
This is hurricane, that sort of thing?
Exactly. Okay. Well, hurricane is more like a 3-day bag, but this is more like a tornado is impending and you have a way out.
Got it.
Or this is like, somebody blew up your electrical station and you just need to not be in your house. Heat wave in Texas kind of stuff.
Sure.
Right? You just need 24 hours to get from a safe place here to a safe place somewhere else. 24 hours is easy, right? It's a backpack. You can move a family of 4 in a single 24-hour backpack if you wanted to. You just get on a plane in Tampa and get off the plane in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, and you stay in a hotel. Safe, bugged out. You're safe from harm. Then you have a 3-day bag. A 3-day bag is when you actually expect a disaster to occur, and it will take up to 72 hours for you to get to a safe haven. Right? Because the idea with a bug-out bag is always to get you from where you are to a safe haven. So if you can get to a safe haven in 24 hours, you only need a 24-hour bug-out bag. If you need 72 hours or up to 72 hours to get to a safe haven, this is more like your hurricane, flood, et cetera, et cetera. Because most likely, you're going to leave your home, you're going to get stuck in traffic, you're going to get moved to like a football stadium somewhere where they're going to take care of you for 24 hours while they bus you to another location. So you need 72 hours worth of gear. In that case, you're carrying a little bit more cash. You're carrying different types of clothes because you're carrying some clothes that you only sleep in versus some clothes that you wear during the day. Mm-hmm. You're going to be carrying things like sunscreen. You're going to be carrying things like sun protection, sunglasses, because you need 72 hours to protect yourself from the elements. You might have a raincoat or a poncho. So it's a little bit different than your 24-hour bag. And then you have full-on escape. Full-on escape means you're leaving leaving your property to relocate to another property for an undetermined period of time. Right. So like massive disasters. So like when Katrina came through, people lost everything. They had to evacuate like they were escaping. And there's kind of two methodologies there. You can escape with your 72-hour bag because you know that you have what you need to get you to where you're going. But then there's an element where if you want to do it properly, you also have to have all of your key documentation, passports, birth certificates, all of that other stuff. So we keep a fire safe. And inside of our fire safe is a fire safe bag so that whenever we have a true escape situation, we can grab a 72-hour bag and grab our important documents at the same time so that everything's mobile along with us. And then we know, as sad as it would be to lose our studio and our house and all of our artwork and all of our children's memories, we're going to lose it. We can't fix that. But what we can do is keep the children and everybody else alive by relocating.
Now, setting aside the fact that he was never any sort of operator, let alone a Tier 1 operator, yet consistently takes Tier 1 operational communities' names in vain as a marketing ploy himself, it's actually Andy who's making a series of fundamental errors here. The first error is not understanding that escape and evasion when your cover is compromised as a spy is not even close to the same thing as the average citizen responding to an emergency. What Andy was trained to do was escape and evade if his cover was ever blown. And in that situation, he's absolutely correct. When the totality of the police force, intelligence services, and potentially military of the foreign country you're in are hunting you, the last thing you want to do is stay in one place. You need to be constantly making movement towards your extraction site. If you stay in one place, it gives the enemy time to mass all of their capabilities against you, find you, and capture or kill you. This is the same reason why in the Army we never occupy a patrol base for more than 24 hours. Staying in one place gives the enemy time to mass their reconnaissance capabilities, indirect fire capabilities, and larger maneuver units against you. But in both of these cases, there's a professional enemy force with capabilities that far outstrip your own. That's not the case when the average citizen is responding to an emergency. There is no enemy force massing capabilities. There's just the hazards generated by the emergency. So your course of action needs to be tailored to those hazards. Now there are, without question, circumstances under which you'd need to evacuate. Wildfires, hurricanes, sufficiently large and nasty chemical spills or fires, or sufficiently violent civil unrest. But there's a laundry list of emergencies that'll only temporarily disrupt one or more utilities. And evacuating the area because your power or water went out for a few days is absolutely nonsensical. Investing in a backup generator and stocking bottled water is far more effective. Furthermore, it may even be cheaper depending on how you plan on evacuating and where you plan to stay. Additionally, depending on the extent of the damage, people will still need to go to work the next day, or shortly thereafter. So evacuating when it's not required isn't actually feasible for most people. Another dangerous element of what he was saying is talking about evacuating by plane. Trying to escape an emergency by plane is like trying to escape a burning high-rise in the elevator. Sure, in theory it's faster, but if the emergency, or anything else for that matter, disrupts its functioning, you're stuck in a much worse situation. And he doesn't really specify what magnitude of disaster he's talking about. And even when he tries to categorize magnitudes of disasters, what he's saying is really about how long it would take to get to your extraction site and nothing about the actual disaster itself. And what he said about flavors of bugouts is just word salad. Yes, there are meaningful distinctions between movements that will take less than 24 hours, movements that are between 24 and 72 hours, and movements that will take you longer than 72 hours, but those are all logistic considerations that he doesn't really actually get into. And what he does say about it is flawed. If you're just getting on some high-speed transport like the ill-fated plane he mentioned, you don't actually need anything to evacuate but your wallet. If, however, you're planning a complex movement, you need your supporting materials to be tailored to the environment and obstacles on that movement. And you'll need enough supplies to support the full duration of that movement. Andy sort of outlined what it looks like if you're evacuated from the area by the government when he talks about staying in a football stadium and then being bussed out. But that process typically takes a lot longer than 72 hours. After Hurricane Katrina, people were housed in various football stadiums and other camps for weeks before they were properly resettled. So one, a 72-hour bag ain't gonna cut it. And two, don't take the government evacuation unless you have no other choice. And finally, if you're ever leaving your home because of an emergency, you'll always need all of your key documents. The only way you'll be able to get some forms of government assistance after a disaster is if you have those documents. So never evacuate without them. Andy's second fundamental error is that the emergency in question is either the end of the world or it isn't. And if it's not, in addition to what I've already said in this video, I talk about what you should do in greater detail in my video, Preparing for Disasters Short of the End of the World. If it is the end of the world, which he sort of alluded to with some of the other stuff he said, all resources are diminishing resources. If it's the end of the world, all production on everything will stop. So there's a timeline on all resources you can't produce yourself. And everywhere you go will have less and less resources as those in the area grab the last of what's left. It will very rapidly become the case if you're on the move that you'll either have to forage for what you need from nature, or you're going to have to prey on people to take what you need from them. In either case, you're far better served to stick with the planning guidance I outlined in my last video, How Long Do You Really Need to Prepare For in an Emergency? Because it's very unlikely that you'll be able to find the resources you need for long on the move. But the idea that you grab what you can on the go does come directly from survival, evasion, resistance, and escape training. They call it shark mentality. You just consume everything you find. You find water, you drink it. You find food, you eat it. You find something useful, you take it, and you keep moving to your extraction site. So if you're conducting escape and evasion, this is exactly what you do. But SEER training is about getting to your extraction site, not about long-term survival. If civilization collapses, you'll need a whole new way of life in which you can produce what you need yourself. Scavenging is not a long-term survival strategy. And what kind of fantasy video game BS is saying you're going to loot ammo off of dead cops? I mean, tell me you have no idea what you're talking about without telling me you have no idea what you're talking about. So you mean to tell me that things are going to get so bad the cops are going to be killed in the street, and their bodies are not going to be recovered by other cops, yet the government is still functional enough that there are still cops on patrol at all. And the bodies of these cops weren't already looted by whoever shot them. Really? This is literally the dumbest post-apocalyptic fanfic I've ever heard. Not more than a month into a full collapse event, you aren't scavenging any resources necessary to survival unless you take them off of somebody by force. Because by then, everything useful will already be in someone's possession. Even harvesting resources from nature will become more and more scarce as people strip whatever they can to survive. But I still owe you the video on why you won't be able to hunt and trap your way through the apocalypse. So having a known quantity of all of the resources necessary to survive through the worst of it, and then having the tools to start producing your own resources once the worst is over, is your best and possibly only plausible survival strategy. And my video on that will be one of the cards at the end. Finally, we need to talk about how what he's saying undermines public safety operations. If you need to evacuate an area, public safety professionals will issue an evacuation order. And if there is an evacuation order, it really is in your best interest to follow it. However, if there's an emergency and there's not an evacuation order, there's often a shelter-in-place order. Because what public safety professionals need from the public after an emergency is that they stay safe and that they stay out of the way of the response operation. Both of these conditions are met by the public sheltering in place after an emergency unless there's a specific threat to people's homes. What public safety professionals don't need is people needlessly clogging up the roads or potentially putting themselves in danger by going out when they don't need to. So evacuating when you don't need to could very well prevent your first responders and public works crews from getting a handle on the situation and repairing the damage, thus extending the period of time that everyone in the area goes without utilities. Furthermore, dealing with internally displaced people, refugees, is one of the most complicated and expensive parts of emergency management or humanitarian assistance. So unless you have someplace specific you're going where you can care for yourself, leaving your house when you don't need to just adds cost and complexity to the response and recovery operations. So what this all adds up to is that you can't just take doctrine from any government agency and uncritically plug it into your contingency plan. Now, there are a lot of concepts from several different government agencies that I believe have meaningful utility, but you need to make sure that you're only taking the parts of doctrine and training that are actually relevant to the mission at hand and then fully adapting those concepts accordingly. As I said, I developed the Individual Readiness Framework from 5,000 to 6,000 pages of DoD and DHS doctrine. But there are several concepts that only partially pertain to civilians conducting emergency response. So there are several points in my book where I introduce a concept and then say we're just using this first part, so don't worry about the rest of it because it doesn't apply. The root of Andy's fundamental error is that he's taking something he was trained to do and has maybe had to actually do for one problem set and saying, I know this works, so this must be the answer to this fundamentally different but seemingly related problem set. So all in all, this is some of the worst advice I've ever heard. It's dangerous, antisocial, and I genuinely worry for his children. So at least as it pertains to emergency preparedness, Andrew Bustamante has no idea what he's talking about and should not be listened to or taken seriously. But that's going to be it for me. So if you found this information useful, give me the old controlled pair on the like and subscribe buttons. And if you found this information useful enough that you want to buy me a beer about it, there's a link to my Patreon and Subscribe Star in the description. So until next time, this is James Merritt for Readiness Nation, reminding you to always be the master of your fate and the captain of your soul.